Hello everyone and welcome to Hockey Hub. I'm Brennan and today we're doing a team preview and we're looking at the Washington Capitals. Now, the Washington Capitals finally broke through in 2018, winning their first ever Stanley Cup, and their team captain and leader Alex Ovechkin won the Conn Smythe Trophy. But Washington has struggled to get back to that championship level since 2018, getting bounced in the first round in both of the following seasons. So they have made some moves this offseason. They did hire a new head coach in Peter Laviolette, and it's going to be interesting to see if they are going to be able to get back to being a true Cup favorite. But we are going to start off with what they added. Now, to start off, the Washington Capitals did sign Henrik Lundqvist. Ideally, Lundqvist was going to be the backup to goaltender Ilya Samsonov, but unfortunately, Lundqvist's heart condition has caused him to miss the entirety of the season, and in all likelihood, his NHL career is probably over. That's a shame. I know a lot of Rangers fans were really weirded out by seeing Lundqvist in a Caps uniform, but that being said, I think everybody still wanted him to play and still be good, so it's unfortunate that he is going to miss the entirety of the season. They did end up signing Craig Anderson to a professional tryout, though. I imagine that Craig Anderson could get a shot at the backup role since that was supposed to be Lundqvist, but they brought in another veteran netminder to kind of back up Samsonov. They also made a depth signing in Trevor Van Riemsdyk. I imagine that Van Riemsdyk plays a bottom pairing role for Washington, a defensive defenseman with some, physical game, but they also recently signed longtime Boston Bruins captain Zdeno Chara. Now, Chara going to Washington was a big surprise for many, including myself. A lot of people figured that he would just end up re-signing in Boston, but that wasn't the case. They signed him on a one-year contract, only paying about $795,000, and I think that is a good deal for the Washington Capitals. I don't imagine that Chara is going to play every night. He's probably most effective at playing spot duty and in critical situations in the game, if you're trying to protect a lead or something like that. So Chara is definitely past his prime. This could end up being his last year. There was rumors about him retiring, but I think that he can be a useful commodity for the Washington Capitals if he's utilized properly in a bottom pairing and kind of utility role. They also signed Connor Sherry to a one-year deal. I think this helps shore up the team's offensive depth. Sherry, I imagine, is going to play a bottom six scoring role, but can give them, over an 82-game schedule, probably about the pace of 35 points, and I think that's very good for, a 1 year, under $1 million contract. They also signed Justin Schultz for 2 years at $4 million. I think that's kind of an overpayment for what Schultz has been these past few years in Pittsburgh. I know a lot of Pittsburgh Penguins fans have said that his play with Jack Johnson is what dragged him down. Keep in mind, Schultz was a very good defenseman up until about 2018 or so. So if Schultz is able to rebound to the form that we saw in his first couple seasons in Pittsburgh, this could actually be a very good signing for the Washington Capitals. That being said, at Schultz's age, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to get back to that form, but the Capitals are certainly betting on it considering the money they gave him. The Washington Capitals ended up letting go of veteran depth players in Travis Boyd, Radko Gudas, and Ilya Kovalchuk. Ilya Kovalchuk was brought in from the Montreal Canadiens to play in a potential top six role and provide some scoring, but he simply didn't do that. He wasn't very effective in the playoffs, and he was just as invisible in the regular season, so it makes sense why Washington didn't choose to bring him back, as no NHL team ended up bringing Kovalchuk back as he signed in the KHL. Radko Gudas, he was traded for Matt Niskanen, and now that Niskanen is retired, it kind of looks like Washington and Philadelphia are both kind of done with their parts of the trade. Gudas was, decent in his first year in Washington, not really an offensive threat, but provides a lot of grit and physicality, and is one of the more feared presences on the blue line in the NHL. But they did let their, longtime star netminder Braden Holtby walk. Now, I know a lot of people saw this coming, including myself. Samsonov is the good up-and-coming young goaltender for the Washington Capitals, but Holtby is kind of the all-time great Washington Capitals goaltender right now, in my opinion. He led them to the Stanley Cup, obviously that tremendous save in the Stanley Cup Finals against Alex Tuck. You could argue Holtby to win the Conn Smythe that year, honestly. He has a Vezina as well as a William M. Jennings. Holtby racked up some really good hardware playing for the Washington Capitals, and in his prime was one of the best goalies in the NHL. His last 2 seasons in Washington weren't great. He put up subpar numbers, and especially this past season where Ilya Samsonov truly did outperform him. But that being said, if Samsonov struggles a little bit, Washington fans could end up missing Holtby, but I think a lot of people saw this coming, and it was probably best for both the player and the team that Holtby was able to move on and get a fresh start somewhere else. Now, despite the fact that it's aging, Washington still boasts one of the best top sixes in the NHL. One of the younger guys there is Jacob Vrana, and I think Vrana is a very underrated player. He just oozes offense. He puts up very good totals, doesn't really get talked about a lot. He's a solid winger there for Washington, and is probably one of those key guys moving forward for Washington. Tom Wilson is one of the most divisive players in the NHL as well. Arguably one of the dirtiest, definitely a controversial player, but that being said, he is a good player. He does put up decent offensive totals, but the hitting, the fighting, and the intangibles is what you really look for with Wilson. But that being said, Wilson is a 20-goal scorer in his own right. TJ Oshie is on a massive contract and is regressing a little bit, but he's still a very productive forward, still brings a good two-way game, and is a definite leader in that locker room. Oshie has been there for quite a few years, obviously being a longtime St. Louis Blue before that, but I think Oshie has fit in very well in Washington and was one of the big reasons why they ended up winning the Stanley Cup. But a few other big reasons why Washington was able to win was the likes of Evgeny Kuznetsov and Nicholas Backstrom. Now, Evgeny Kuznetsov has had some issues related to prohibited substances within the NHL, but if he's able to clean himself up and get back to the form we saw in that Stanley Cup final run, where Evgeny Kuznetsov, I believe he actually led the team in points, I think that Kuznetsov is a really good center. I'm not sure if he's a true top-line center. Definitely a top-six center. I think that him and Nicholas Backstrom make for a really good 1-2 punch. I think that they definitely work better together. Backstrom is one of the best playmakers in the entire league. He's been that for over a decade, playing with Ovechkin. It does. I think Backstrom does help, boost Ovechkin's goal totals. I think they complement each other really well. And then getting into Alex Ovechkin, Ovechkin will always be the guy in Washington as long as he's there. In my opinion, he's the greatest pure goal scorer of all time. He's the face of that franchise and Washington's best ever player. He's their captain. He won the Conn Smythe. He finally was able to become a true leader for that team. And even at his age, he's still a very productive player. He still hits. Obviously, he still scores a lot of goals and puts up points. Ovechkin is always a threat for the Rocket Richard Trophy, and even though he's only got 1 year left on his contract, I imagine that Washington does end up signing him to maybe a shorter term but very expensive extension, as Ovi is very much the face of the franchise in Washington. I imagine that Justin Schultz is going to play a top four role for the Washington Capitals. He was brought in at $4 million a year, and that kind of is top four money. They are going to expect a little bit more offense than we've seen from Schultz in the past few years, but if he's able to provide that offense and play a power play role, I think that's going to be a very useful asset for the Washington Capitals. Brendan Dillon was brought in at the trade deadline, and I think he slots into that top four, maybe even alongside Justin Schultz. Dillon is a very good defensive defenseman, one of the more underrated D-men in the league, simply because he doesn't put up those great offensive numbers, but he brings a very strong physical game and is a very solid and reliable defender. Dmitry Orlov has been a long-time Washington Capital and does have a little bit of offense to go along with a strong defensive game. Orlov quietly puts up decent totals in a strong game, and all the praise kind of ends up going to John Carlson, which is fair because in my opinion, I think John Carlson is the best pure offensive defenseman currently in the NHL. Carlson doesn't have a bad defensive game, but that being said, he's no standout, but considering that he was over point per game this past season, it makes sense why he was a Norris nominee. A lot of Caps fans think he should have won, but I think it did go to the right guy in Roman Josi, as Josi was really good at both ends of the ice, where Carlson is definitely known more for his offense. Carlson is definitely one of the most elite offensive point-producing defensemen in the NHL, and his defense is average at best, but when you put up that much points, it makes sense why he's such a useful asset for the Washington Capitals. I think Craig Anderson is going to end up getting the backup job in Washington. I imagine that they want a veteran netminder to go with the young Ilya Samsonov. Anderson has been a very good goaltender throughout his career, but now is definitely on the decline, and I'm unsure if he's going to be able to be a top backup in the NHL. Anderson's numbers were quite poor, but then again, he was playing for Ottawa, so perhaps in a much better system in Washington, he's able to kind of rebound a little bit for what could be his last year and put up better numbers. But the real name to talk about here is Ilya Samsonov. Samsonov was one of the best goaltending prospects in the NHL for a while there. He was a first-round pick, and in his rookie year, he really showed why. He did outperform Braden Holtby. He had a winning record and a solid save percentage, and I think that Samsonov is going to be Washington's starter for years to come. He oozes potential. He's a very strong goaltender in almost all aspects of the game, and I expect him to have a strong season. If he doesn't if he has a little bit of a sophomore slump, that could bring a lot of troubles for Washington because they don't have a reliable goaltender like Braden Holtby to lay back on. So Washington is really going to have to count on Ilya Samsonov being the real deal in year two. Outside of John Carlson, I think that all of Washington's best players are forwards. We already talked about John Carlson and how he's one of the most elite offensive defensemen in the league. He's been that for a while. I imagine that he does end up getting a Norris Trophy at some point with the offense he produces. But then I think Alex Ovechkin, TJ Oshie, Evgeny Kuznetsov, and Nicholas Backstrom should round out this list. I think you could maybe argue that Jacob Vrana should be in the place of TJ Oshie. You can't really go wrong with either guy. I know a lot of people would give it to Vrana, but I'm going to give it to Oshie for a strong two-way game here. But Vrana is probably going to take over this next season. Backstrom and Kuznetsov is one of the best 1-2 punches in the league. Both those guys are really good playmakers. Kuznetsov being the more goal-scoring of the two, but Kuznetsov is definitely a pass-first type. Backstrom also brings a strong two-way game with him, whereas Kuznetsov is a little shaky in the defensive end. And obviously, Alex Ovechkin isn't the greatest in the defensive zone either. His analytical numbers aren't good, but I don't think that matters too much when you score 50 goals a year. Alex Ovechkin is still one of the best wingers in the league, and I think is still the best goal scorer in the league. He's definitely going to be in the fight for the Rocket Richard this season. As far as players that I want to talk about Lars Eller. Now, Lars Eller has been one of the more underrated third-line centers in the league. He's been really good for Washington and was a key piece in them winning the Stanley Cup. In fact, he did score the Stanley Cup clinching goal. So I think that Lars Eller should get more attention, and that's kind of all that I have to say about him. I watched him play for a while in Montreal, and he's definitely become a much better player in Washington. I do want to talk about the contract situation with Alex Ovechkin as well. Now, Ovechkin has got 1 year left on his deal, and I don't think the Washington Capitals want him hitting the free agent market, and I don't personally think that Ovechkin cares to go to a different team either. Ovechkin has already stated that he plans on playing for Washington his entire NHL career, but he could end up considering signing in the KHL in Russia in a few years. So it's going to be interesting to see how much term Ovechkin gets on his deal, as this very well could end up being his last deal. It's reported that he wants above $10 million, so that is going to be a very expensive contract for the Washington Capitals, but considering the amount of goals he puts up, he's likely still worth it. And then I want to talk about their hot prospect, Connor McMichael. Now, Connor McMichael has been on an absolute tear in the OHL. Playing for the London Knights, McMichael has become one of the best prospects in the entire NHL, and playing for Team Canada, he's put up really good numbers as well. In the 2020 World Junior Championships playing for Canada, he scored 5 goals and helped them win a gold medal. So McMichael does have that winning pedigree, and that is going to be useful in Washington. I think that McMichael is going to be a really good top 6 forward, and is probably going to be a guy that ends up replacing Backstrom when Backstrom falls out of his prime. I do expect McMichael to play in the NHL within 2 years, and I think he's going to be a very useful player. At this stage for Washington, I don't feel very comfortable calling them a cup favorite. They haven't been able to get past the first round these past few years, and their core is getting older. Eventually, Ovechkin does have to slow down, and I do have some questions about their goaltending. So I'm going to have to say that they're a contender, but they are still close to a cup favorite because they do have a great core. They are a previous cup champion within the last 3 years, and they are always going to be a threat. I see this team having another good regular season, and unfortunately getting bounced in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. I think it's great that they were able to go on that 2018 run and get Ovechkin a Stanley Cup, but to be honest, I'm not sure if I see it happening again. They're playing in a really hard division as well, playing with the likes of Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Boston, and the Rangers and Islanders. So they are going to have tough competition, but I can still see them finishing top 3 in that division. It's just a matter of what they do in the playoffs. Having Peter Laviolette as a head coach should help their chances. He is a good head coach and was a head coach for a while there in Nashville, so hopefully that their players are going to be able to work well with Laviolette's system, but it's going to be interesting to see for sure. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.